Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, honoring Arbor Day on April 26th, with an ongoing commitment to sustainable stewardship and conservation of Missouri's forests. ChooseWood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
And have you ever been able to make that direct connection? Someone has a ghost story and you're like, you know what? I think we figured out the name of this ghost.
Well, of course not substantively. I don't want to overpromise what we can do at the Historical Society.
But you could at least tell them, okay, here's some possible suspects.
Right. So we've got lots of resources to learn who lived in the home over the years. And then once you know who they were, there's all kinds of opportunities to find out more about their lives.
I'm Sarah Fensky. St. Louis is an old city founded more than 250 years ago. Now, none of the structures built in the 1760s still exist, but houses from the 1880s fill entire neighborhoods. In many parts of St. Louis, a century-old home hardly counts as old. And when you move into a house with a long history, it's hard not to be curious about who lived there and what happened when they did. Producer Kayla Drake recently tagged along with a homeowner who wanted to know more about the history of his home. Their research trip began at the Missouri Historical Society Library and Research Center, located in a stately building across the street from Forest Park.
John Savio's home in St. Louis's Tower Grove South neighborhood was built in 1908, but he doesn't know much more than that.
Yeah, I didn't know who had really lived there other than the most recent folks we bought it from, and then maybe a few people before that, just based on what our neighbors had told us. So yeah, we were super interested in who else has sat in the living room.
When John first tried to research his house's history after he and his wife purchased it nearly 2 years ago, he hit a dead end.
When I was naive when I first bought the house, I was like, I'm going to call the city and try to find a blueprint of and the guy was like, they didn't even make the blueprints. And I was kind of like discouraged. I'm like, okay, there's probably nothing.
He only found one name, Gustav Wiest, the architect who designed his 2-story brown brick house.
But that was really all I ever found. So I was like, when I heard there'd be more, I was thrilled. And I don't have like a good reason to want to know this. Like, it's just kind of curiosity.
Then John got in touch with Dennis Northcott. Dennis is an associate archivist at the Missouri Historical Society Library and Research Center off Skinker Boulevard. It's set in a former Jewish synagogue with a huge dome room that sounds like a PA system when you stand in the middle of it.
So our Library and Research Center is free and open to the public. We're open Tuesday through Friday from noon to 5 and Saturday 10 to 5. And researchers are welcome to come in to research the history of their home or their family genealogy or countless aspects of local history that they might be interested in.
Dennis is John's guide. He'll show him the ins and outs of house history research, starting with the city directory.
So this, for example, is the 1930 city directory.
Wow, it's the original book.
Right, exactly. So you can see here it's alphabetical by name, but what we want is the part back here in pink, the reverse directory, where you can look up your street. So we'll go back to find Utah.
Yeah, there it is.
And what's the name?
Theo H. Ratz.
And then once you know the name, you can go to the front portion of the book and look up his name alphabetically.
Yeah, Theo H. General Contractor.
And there's the value.
$6,800.
Right, so it was valued at $6,800 in 1930.
That is crazy.
Next up, they put the books back on the shelf and go to the internet for help. One source is newspapers.com.
So go up there and just keyword search, put in quotes, 3828, and leave off place. That's more likely to cause you problems.
And boom, dozens of articles pop up. You can find almost anything from the Post-Dispatch, Globe Democrat, and even German newspapers from the late 1800s to mid-1900s.
So this is photos. Look at that. Wow.
Right, so you discovered that Theodore Ratz lived there in 1930. He was the head of the household. And this is from a similar time period, just 3 years later. Something about one of his kids being in a play of some sort.
With 6,500 costumed children.
Yeah, quite an event.
Looks like Robin Hood. I could look at this all day.
They looked at everything from yearbooks to wedding announcements.
At a tea last Sunday, the date of the wedding of Miss Sylvia Ratz to Wilfred Dexter Fales was made known. The tea was given at the home of her parents, Mr. and Mrs. T. Henry Ratz of where I live now. Each guest received a small white heart-shaped cake pierced by a red arrow on which was printed the date of the wedding. I wish we still got those at weddings.
The family that took up the bulk of research time was the Ratzes. Thanks to census records, John knows that they lived in his home for about 40 years and had 3 daughters.
And then if you click the view record, you can view the actual handwritten census page, which is going to give you additional information.
That is wild. Man, it's so interesting to me how these guys found, this house, why they picked it.
Another useful place to find information is the Missouri Historical Society's Genealogy Index database. That's something Dennis and his team have compiled for the last 15 years.
So this reference is telling you that there's a photograph of Jane Ratz in the Roosevelt High School yearbook of 1933. And I found that for you earlier, so I'll show you what that looks like. So here's that page that the reference refers to.
Oh, this is a great quote. The vain talk much, and that is why she prefers to listen silently. Oh.
John calls himself a nostalgic guy. So when he looks at these photos, he wonders if his family had ever met the Ratzes.
My parents grew up on Juniata in the city. Mm-hmm. It's funny to think about, what if they had just walked past these people one day? I'm looking at her photo, and
sure.
It's always a crazy thought to have.
John even found one of his grandpa's brothers in an employee magazine, posing for a photo of a softball league.
He's third in there, huh? Man, I bet my dad would probably know a lot of these names, too.
But the best part of this morning's research session was not seeing old dusty documents or searching online. The surprise came from a magazine featuring, quote, portraits of prominent St. Louisans. Remember that architect that John found, the one that designed his house?
There he is, Mr. Gustav. How crazy. Wow, look at him. He's got quite the mustache.
And there's the obituary from 1947.
1947. City Hall co-designer. He co-designed City Hall? Whoa.
Yeah, I'll give you a little details there in the obituary, I think.
Gustav Wust, 85, architect who helped design City Hall and Union Station, died yesterday of a stroke at the Oddfellows home in Liberty, Missouri. Wow.
John had no idea about the treasure trove of resources waiting for him at the library. And when he goes home, he said the first thing he's showing his wife is that photo of Mr. Gustav and his mustache.
And that was our producer, Kayla Drake, following along on a research trip with homeowner John Savio and archivist Dennis Northcott of the Missouri Historical Society. Our audio engineer, Aaron Dorr, also helped Kayla produce the piece. And now here with us today to answer your questions and hear your house history stories is Dennis Northcott himself. Dennis, welcome.
Good to be here.
So, Dennis, it's kind of remarkable how much John was able to find with your help. Is that typical, that there would be so much there?
Yes, there's so much available. And in recent years, it's gotten easier and easier in the internet age with more and more things being digitized and made just available at the click of the button. So there's digitized newspapers and census records, historic photos, maps and atlases, deeds, building permits, and you can use all these sources to piece together the history of your home and maybe find some interesting stories about the former residents.
And so people can just do one stop. They come by and see you, basically, and you're going to show them all these different records that they can access.
Well, a good place to start is our website, our House History Research page, which is mohistory.org/house-research. So that'll give you guides to how to access all these sources. And people, of course, are welcome to visit our Library and Research Center to do some research. Many sources are online, but many things you'll have to still visit us to look them up. But I don't want to suggest it's super easy. It's challenging, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of detective work.
So when you have a guy like John come in and he's asking you all these questions, like, what about this? What happened next? Is that something you're enjoying, that hunt that he's on as well?
Oh, sure. I mean, even though it's not my home or similar with helping genealogists, it's not my ancestors, it can be very interesting. And it's just the thrill of the chase is a lot of the enjoyment of it.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear John say he didn't really have a reason that he was interested in this. I always think about somebody might start a journey like this because maybe something's wrong with their house or they're trying to get to the bottom of something specific. Do you find people coming in, they're just kind of curious?
Yeah, and I think it's just where you live, it's just so personal. And it's just natural to have that curiosity, particularly when you live in a historic home that might be 100 years old or so. And from time to time, people have a ghost in their house, and that's why they want to investigate the past. That's not too uncommon.
So they're trying to figure out if there's a connection between the form the ghost takes and the history of this house.
Right, like did somebody die in some dramatic way back in the house ages ago, just as an example.
And have you ever been able to make that direct connection? Someone has a ghost story and you're like, you know what? I think we figured out the name of this ghost.
Well, of course not substantively. I don't want to overpromise what we can do at the Historical Society.
But you could at least tell them, okay, here's some possible suspects.
Right. So we've got lots of resources to learn who lived in the home over the years. And then once you know who they were, there's all kinds of opportunities to find out more about their lives.
So we're curious, if you're listening to this, have you tried to research your house? What have you learned? Or maybe you have questions for Dennis Northcott about something you've learned and you're not sure where to take that next step. You can call us at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us a tweet at STL on air. We already heard from Abby. She writes, Dennis Northcott is a true gift. He was so helpful when I was in grad school and when I worked for the National Park Service. No question was too weird or too out there. Now, some questions might be too weird for the radio, but it's good to know that, Dennis, in real life, you're up for just about anything. Can you recall any questions that have almost stopped you in your tracks that people are coming in research-wise
I
with?
don't know. I think it probably happens from time to time. I've certainly been stumped many times, but nothing comes to mind offhand, a really crazy one at least.
What's the most common thing that people want to know about their house?
Well, who lived there over time, how old it is, when it was first built, and of course people would love to find a historic photo of their home. And our photos department has thousands and thousands of photos of historic St. Louis homes, but by no means is it a historic photo of every home in the area, not by a long shot. And in fact, just a couple weeks ago, I was researching or helping somebody research their 19-teens Webster Groves home. And we found through our genealogy and local history index a photo of the home in 1915 that was published in the United Railways Bulletin. The first owner lived or worked for that company, and for some reason they published a photo of the home in this magazine.
Wow.
So the researcher was thrilled.
That felt like a good score.
Right, no doubt.
Do you ever find you just come up totally empty?
No, that hardly ever happens, because with things like city directories as the baseline starting point, you can almost always find out who lived in the home pretty readily. Now, sometimes there's a street name change, which is one thing that can stump you, but usually we can find the basics of who lived in the home over time.
You can push past those street name
most
problems. We're talking today to Dennis Northcott. He's an associate archivist for the Missouri History Museum and is here to help you get to the bottom of the questions you have about your house and its history. We do need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation with Dennis, and we're going to get ready to talk about some of your experiences. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, honoring Arbor Day on April 26th, with an ongoing commitment to sustainable stewardship and conservation of Missouri's forests. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome back. We're talking today about how to research your old St. Louis area home. There are a lot of resources out there. Many of them are digitized, not all of them. It's not necessarily simple, but you can find these answers. We've heard from somebody who has, and we're here today with Dennis Northcott. He's an associate archivist for the Missouri History Museum and really helps people in this quest. I'm going to go to the phone lines. Ellen is calling from St. Louis. Ellen, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi.
Hi, I understand you have a question for Dennis.
Yes, hi. Thanks. This is very interesting. I live, typically, the people that are interested, I guess, in an old house that was built in 1866. And there's been lots of rumors that floated around, and you never know what's true and what's not true about the history of your house. But I'm wondering, do you have resources that are that old that I can look into?
Ellen, thank you for that question. And yeah, 1866, that is old.
Yes, that is pretty old for St. Louis. But yes, we do have resources that'll help you. The city directories will be a good starting point. They're similar in format to a telephone book, and they'll give the person's occupation and address. And they've been digitized from 1863 to 1923. So we can do some searching in digitized directories for your address and possibly get a hit for who lived in the house in that early time. Now, interestingly, in 1867, there was a comprehensive renumbering of the streets. So that could be a little bit of a problem. But in the later 1860s, we may be able to get a hit really quickly.
Wow.
And you're welcome to contact me with that question.
So, Ellen, that's some good news. That seems like even though this is going to be a challenge, Dennis is up to the challenge. Let's go back to the phone lines. And again, if you want to call in, 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. We're happy to take your call. Annalisa is calling. Annalisa, hi. You're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining us. I understand you have actually gone through this process with Dennis.
Yes, I have. And it was amazing. He found such cool stuff.
So were you starting with any sort of particular question in mind?
No, not really. The house is 125 years old, and I just kind of wanted to get a picture of who had lived here before and what were their lives like.
And Annalisa, what neighborhood is this house in?
I'm in Tower Grove.
Okay. So she's there, Dennis, in the Tower Grove South area. And so then what were your first steps with Annalisa? What were you able to find out here?
So we looked in the census from 1900, 1910, 1920, and 1930 and 40. 1940 is the most recent census that's available to the public. There's a 72-year gap before the federal government releases the records. They released the statistical data right away, but the actual census pages with the names and personal information. So, and if you do your math, the 1950 census plus 72 is being released this year.
So that's probably pretty exciting for you.
Yeah, in April 1st. So you'll be able to see who was in your house in 1950 starting April 1st. But so the census had, you can see who was in the house from year to year. And in fact, with Annalisa's house in the 1900 census, there were amazingly 9 people living in her household.
And Annalisa, is this a huge South City house?
Absolutely not. It is a pretty small house, so that shocked me.
And Dennis, is that common that you're going to see all these people packed into what we think of today as a pretty small single-family home?
Well, I've had many cases over the years helping researchers, and we go to the census and find their address in the census page, and they look at it and say, oh my God, how are that many people living in my home? That's incredible.
Yeah, so Annalisa is a good example of that. So you found a whole bunch of people living there. Anybody noteworthy?
Not particularly. Maybe Annalisa would remember. But in 1910, there was a man named Paul Hunt lived there. And his occupation was given. He was a policeman. And that was a cue for me. I knew we had a history of the police department in 1902 and 1910, 2 separate histories, that had photographs of all the policemen. So we were able to find 2 photographs of this particular individual who lived in her home 100-plus years ago in these wonderful old-time police uniforms.
Annalisa, what was that like, seeing the face of somebody who was like within those walls, doing the things you do every day?
Oh, wild. It was amazing. I was really thrilled he was able to find those photographs.
So, Annalisa, now that you know all this stuff about who used to live in your house, any big takeaways or something that, that you just find yourself sort of thinking about as you think about this process?
I think it's just, I feel so lucky, I think, to be able to have this window into the past of the house and into the people who used to live here, because the archives and the house itself are really a way to see, who people were and how they lived and what mattered to them and what made their lives beautiful or what made it difficult, with 9 people in the house. So it really feels like a privilege to be able to learn all these things about the house.
Well, Annalisa, thank you for sharing your story. That sounds like, Dennis, that was a fun one.
Yeah. We also found a German language newspaper in 1905, a little article about some kids who lived in the home accidentally started a fire in the house.
Oh, wow. So there was some excitement in this particular house. I want to go back to the phone lines. John is calling from Webster Groves. John, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, thanks for joining us. What's your story?
I live in the house I grew up in Webster. My parents purchased this house in 1953, so it's been in our family since that time. When we had a remodel done of the kitchen, they ripped out the ceiling, and we discovered a treasure trove of postcards that were mainly mailed from Europe. Apparently, the people who lived in the house at some point, the research that I've done indicates that the son of a banker who would travel to Europe and then send these postcards back to his family, we found a whole catalog of those, and we also found a yearbook, a high school yearbook, I believe from like 1915. The High School News is what it's called, and my sister, who works for the library, says that was what Central High School used to be called.
Wow. I mean, John, that is so cool to find these things just tucked away. You wouldn't have found them if not for this remodel. Dennis, people are generally coming to you for information. Do you ever have people come to you with information? I found this thing in my house. I'm wondering if this should be archived.
Right. That happens fairly often, and we welcome donations. That's how we've amassed our collection over the last 150 plus years. So if you would like to donate some of those materials, those postcards, yearbooks, those would be things we might be interested in.
Really? That would be in your wheelhouse?
Sure.
Even postcards. What do you feel like the postcards can tell us that make that potentially interesting?
Well, it's presumably it was somebody related to the family writing home on a trip, maybe. It might give some insight to the history of the home, or maybe what was going on in Europe at the time. It's hard to say.
So thank you for that call, John. Andy asks on Twitter, does the Missouri History Museum have St. Louis business archives, or are they still mostly at the Mercantile Library?
We don't have many cases of actual records of businesses, but one thing we do have that's really helpful is a lot of St. Louis companies in the mid-20th century published employee newsletters, companies like Anheuser-Busch, McDonnell Douglas, Southwestern Bell, and on and on. And we've been indexing the data, the names, the employee names from those magazines into our online genealogy and local history index. So people oftentimes find these incredible stories about their parents or grandparents in these magazines. That sounds
amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not just names. This is like he was Employee of the Month.
Right. So my dad and grandfather worked for Union Electric, and we indexed years ago the employee magazines from 1913 to 1969. And after that project was completed, I keyed in my surname, and I found 47 articles in these magazines, many accompanied by photos of my father and grandparents.
Wow, that is so cool. So even you, I mean, you're here every day, and you're still finding new things along the way.
Sure. And I've stumbled upon things about my own family history from time to time.
Anything
but then again,
juicy?
No, not particularly, or not that I want to share.
That's a fair distinction there, Dennis. Let's go back.
Just kidding.
Let's go back to the phone lines. Mary is calling from St. Louis. Mary, hi. You're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for taking my call. I live in a house built in 1965, and Erwin Nessel was the architect. And he was a mid-century modern-style architect who studied with Frank Lloyd Wright. And he did a lot of things around South County, like the Walter Knoll building, where Mo Modern has their store now. But what's notable is he built this house for Arno Hoyduk, who owned Ravenna Mosaic Tile, and they did the commission for the Cathedral Basilica.
Oh, how cool.
In other words, they laid the installation, the tile work there, and for the 30 years that it took to lay that tile. So I have a fireplace in my home with 24-karat gold tile in it.
Wow. Mary, that's amazing. I imagine that this research that you've done where you learned this has now become a great talking point if you ever have a cocktail party or people stopping by.
Oh, my friends love my fireplace. And, when you go into the museum downstairs at the cathedral, you see pictures of Arno Hoyduk down there, laying the tile, and you see his photographs down there. But how I discovered this when we bought the home and the sellers left us all the blueprints. We laid them out on the table, and I saw Arno's name. And, of course, they told us the tiles were 24 karat gold, and the person who built the home worked at the Cathedral Basilica. But they didn't say that he actually owned Ravenna Mosaic and, came from Berlin to work on this commission,
Yeah, Mary, that is such a cool story. And Dennis, it makes me wonder, do you ever find people coming in that are interested in specific architectural details and kind of coming into it through that versus just being interested in the people's names?
Sure. That happens from time to time. And it's a little more difficult to learn about architectural details on a particular home. But then again, sometimes we might have a historic photograph. We do have a collection of architectural plans, but it's just a small number of architects and architectural firms who happen to donate plans to us over the years. So it's very rare that we get a hit when somebody's researching a home and we have the plan.
That's going to be a fortunate fluke right there.
Right.
Well, Mary, thank you for sharing about that story. Man, I really want to see that fireplace. In fact, I'm going to have our producers follow up, see if you can send us a photo, because I think there's probably a lot of people very curious about that particular feature. Dennis, you had talked about this digitizing project. You started the St. Louis Genealogy and Local History Index that now there's a whole bunch of records in this. Have you made a pretty big dent in terms of what you want to digitize versus what still remains?
Yeah. Now, the Genealogy and Local History Index specifically is just an index, so you're not going to see the digital item on the website. It's just an index that directs you the fact that we have something.
And then you might have to go to
visit us,
microfilm or things like that.
Or you can come visit us and we'll send you a scan of it. Or you can place an order for a scan of the item from our website. So we've indexed Who's Who publications, scrapbooks of newspaper obituaries, those employee magazines I talked about, school yearbooks, military records. So you can go there and you can search either by personal name, business name, or address. So that's another place I go for house history research. You key in your address and you might get a hit to something like a picture of somebody in Employee magazine in 1940, for example.
That is so cool. So there's really a lot of good stuff now through this index. We also heard from CJ. He called in to ask about whether people can make an appointment to this kind of history to come see you, and if so, how they go about doing that.
So you don't need to make an appointment to visit our library and research center. If you want to do house history research, you can just come in anytime during our open hours. And our staff is there to give you some guidance. And just make sure you start with our House History Resources page. Once again, mohistory.org/house-history. That'll give you a good guide to resources.
We will also get this all on our website, stlonair.show. If you check in this afternoon, we'll have a podcast version of our conversation with Dennis. You can listen back to all of these helpful tips. We'll also get that link in there so you can go right to the source. I want to hear from one other person. Our producers spoke to Maria Jardina. She's a Soulard resident and a history buff. And she told our producer, Kayla Drake, what led her to dig into the history of her home.
I would see Henry Louis Gates Jr. doing Finding Your Roots. As soon as that show would end, I would be stoked up. We're going to do this. And my husband's like, oh, boy, here we go. Now what rabbit hole we're going to go down. But it kind of got me started. These documents came from City Hall. I waddled down there one time on my lunch hour with my little binder, and I started to do the research. They would list who bought it from who bought it from who bought it from who, which was great. But, all right, this is just a comment.
Yeah.
If people don't learn cursive, we will never be able to read our own history. I sit there with a magnifying glass because I'm thinking, oh, that looks so pretty. I'll be able to read it. And I thought, what in the name of Sam Hill?
Now, Maria Jardina followed the trail through the depths of City Hall and the Central Library before taking her case to the Missouri History Museum and to Dennis Northcott.
But at one point, it ran out. The History Museum, I hit pay dirt there. I walked in the door, and it was just like light came through. It was amazing. Dennis actually helped me find the guy that built my house. I have an actual photo of him, and he never lived there. His son lived there. So there were actually 29 owners over the course of when the house was built. At any rate, they were all working class people. They were shoe clerks, and they worked for lumber yards, and they worked on the river. There was a longshoreman. saddle makers, bakers. There are some really great people that were frontiersmen that really did great things to develop St. Louis. With Dennis's help, I was able to trace back not only when my house was built, but all the way back to King Carlos III of Spain when he granted the original land grant. It was before the Louisiana Purchase. I'm able to go back to 1767, the very first one.
And Maria Giardina has now collected a binder 3 inches thick of house history information. She's also learned a lot about some ghosts in this old Soulard house. But she noted that her knowledge is not just about her home. Maria explained how exploring this history has changed how she sees the city.
So I went down this rabbit hole. I was like taking out library books on this people that, and there was a couple really good maps and stuff that I took copies of. But when I drive in the city, it's like these street names, I know who that is. I know who Sarpy is. I know who Dodier is. It's like, oh my gosh, these were living, breathing people.
And that is Maria Giardina. She's gone on this journey. I think this journey has been so fruitful for so many people. We've heard from them today. Dennis, what's the thought you'd want to leave people with if they're thinking, boy, do I want to take the plunge down this historic rabbit hole?
Well, like I said, there's many sources that are available, and you can dig in as little or as lengthy as you want. Maria, who you just spoke to, spent months and months doing this, but you can just come visit us for a day and see what you can find.
And again, no appointments needed. So Dennis Northcott, Associate Archivist for the Missouri History Museum, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
This episode was produced by Kayla Drake and Aaron Dorr, with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here. If you learned something new from today's episode, consider leaving us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the easiest way to help people discover our show. We appreciate it. Thank you. St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, honoring Arbor Day on April 26th, with an ongoing commitment to sustainable stewardship and conservation of Missouri's forests. ChooseWood.com.